which comes from the 5th chapter of Matthew, 43 through 45. This is the Common English Bible version. You have heard that it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who harass you, so that you will be acting as children of your Father who is in heaven. He makes the sun rise on both evil and the good, and sends rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous. Word of God for the people of God. Jesus in this scripture says, pray for your enemy. That's not easy. It actually kind of hurts. It's one of those statements that Jesus makes that's kind of an ouch. Because, let's face it, the way we look at it is, well, he doesn't deserve that, or she doesn't deserve that. Or maybe we just know that person that, well, they're just, they're not very nice. I have one such person I work with. We've worked together for about 15 years, and let's just say oil and water are best friends compared to us. No matter where we are, what we do, there's always tension. I don't know how this happened. I don't know where this came from. I can't point to any one thing. We just don't get along, no matter what we do. I've always tried to get along with him. Tried not to say anything bad about him, this, that, and the other. But no matter what I do, it just doesn't work. And at this point between us, there's tension even as we exchange hellos in the hallway. A few years ago, this tension seemed to be at its height. We had a blow-up. And somewhere from the Spirit, I had either just read this statement from Jesus, or it came to mind. And I remembered it, and I started praying for him. I earnestly prayed for him. And it hurt. It wasn't easy. Because when I was praying this prayer, I wasn't feeling it. That's the praying for your enemy part. It's tough. It's not easy for praying for someone you don't like. Now, I know my personality. I'm not the type to back down. My default is to win. But I had to suppress that and pray for him earnestly. And, because someone said this to me a few weeks ago, I didn't pray for his demise. I actually prayed for him. Yeah, good stuff. I earnestly prayed for him. And about a year and a half ago, he got promoted. And I earnestly went to him and congratulated him and wished him well. And have prayed for his success. But I'm telling you, each time I do, it's tough. It is not easy. However, I will say that I have found it has softened my attitude towards him. We still don't get along by any stretch of the imagination. But I've come to realize that he too is a child of God. And he's a pretty devout Catholic, as a matter of fact. That's what the scripture today is. The scripture today comes from within Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. A sermon which Jesus was really upsetting the apple cart with the Jewish community. The setting here is that Jesus had just come from the wilderness. He had been tempted while fasting for 40 days. So he'd been tested. He was starving and was tempted, and he was tempted with all the same things that you and I are. But he chose to stay true. He lived up to the commandments of the Old Testament. Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, he's telling people how to fulfill the law. He's explaining how the law, Jewish law, is actually to be interpreted. This idea of hate your enemy came from a misinterpretation of Jewish law. Leviticus 19:18 says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people. My emphasis added. But love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then over time, the Jewish people took that and looked also in Psalms. Psalm 26:5. I abhor the assembly of evildoers and refuse to sit with the wicked. And then Psalm 139:21 and 22. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them, and I count them with my enemies. These verses have been put together and misinterpreted very legalistically, so that as long as they are not your people, then you can hate them. What Jesus was saying also, though, came from Exodus 23, 4 and 5. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you has fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure to help them with it. And then in Deuteronomy 23:7, do not despise the Edomite, for the Edomites are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you resided as foreigners in their country. So that's what Jesus was representing, was this misinterpretation. That's what he addressed. But let's take that and look what it means for us today. Let's first talk about who Jesus meant by our enemy. We can all be legalistic at times, just like the Jews were then. Maybe we can be like the Jewish people and try to legalize our way out of this. Try not to love our enemy. Because surely Jesus didn't mean that we have to actually love everybody. He knew people better than us. He knew that there would be people, at least some people, at least that one guy, who God would be okay with me not loving. But if you look at the latter part of this scripture from today, he causes the sun to shine on evil and the good, and the rain to fall on the righteous and unrighteous. So that translation would be everyone, even that guy. They are all children of God, and we must love them. And folks, the everybody here doesn't just mean the people you don't like or that don't like you. It means everyone. The prisoners, the homeless, the drug addicted, the people that just don't like you, everyone. But what's love? What does it look like? Frankly, I think we have the wrong impression of love in our society. We have this diluted meaning of love in our society, and we have romanticized it all at the same time. We dilute it with things like, I love ice cream. I love this TV show. I love this. I love that. And then we also have this romanticized version of love that's happily ever after. We watch a movie in which two people have been at odds, and they come together. Then the birds sing, the music comes up, and they walk blissfully into the sunset, happily ever after, and nothing will ever go wrong again. We fall in love. We fall out of love. But none of this is really love. Love is a choice. That's what Jesus was saying. He said, love your enemy. You are not going to make your enemy like an ice cream cone and walk around on a hot summer day and say, I love this guy. Or all of a sudden realize how wrong you've both been and run into each other's arms, swirl around, and the music comes up, the credits roll, and you are happily ever after. That's not the way it works. You're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to make a choice to follow what Jesus said and intentionally love your enemy. And as with many choices in life, it's not easy. It's difficult to choose to love someone when they don't act the way you think they should, or when they don't love you back. But that is a choice you must make. So what does it mean to love? That one's even tougher. Frankly, I struggled with this week. It was very difficult to write this sermon because of that one piece. And I struggled with this. Normally I can get the sermon because I only preach about once every 3 months or so. So I'm ahead a week early and I practice and go through it. And this sermon ended about 5 o'clock this morning because of this piece. Because you see, there's a fairly popular theology out there, and in my opinion, a simplistic one, that teaches love means pretty much indulge everything. I don't subscribe to that. Now, love is patient and love is kind. But love isn't a free-for-all. It's not live and let live. Now, it's certainly situational. In some cases, it will mean that you have to give and give and give and give of yourself to the point of sacrifice, if that is what God calls you to do in that situation. But there's another part. If you look just before our scripture today in Matthew 5, Jesus is talking about another aspect of love: accountability. My lovely wife the other day said this: love is a two-sided coin. One side grace, and the other accountability. Jesus in this scripture, the one for today, is talking about grace. And he talks about the grace part just prior to ours. Jesus tells us to turn the other cheek when struck, or to give over our coat when sued. But in this same sermon, and scripture must be taken in context, he discussed accountability. Jesus stung the people with his words on murder and adultery that essentially said even the smallest step in one's mind towards either of these, and you've committed them. Love is not allowing an abusive spouse to abuse. Love is not allowing a heroin user to use heroin. Love is grace and accountability. And the grace part a lot of times is easier. When it gets more difficult is when we need to hold others accountable in their actions, but love them all the same, or show them grace at the same time. I gave the example of an abusive spouse or a heroin user. Those are easier. Those actions are clearly wrong. Certainly, Jesus would not condone these situations. Those people need to be confronted, and our society assists us in doing this through its laws. But what about if there's someone who's just acting wrongly? That's a lot more difficult.